Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's nice to see so many familiar faces from the community. Today we are gathering because of a community call. Today's topic is get involved in decentralized governance with Q. For reasons of transparency, I would like to mention that this call will be recorded. So at the beginning of the week, we asked you to send us questions. You did this several times. It's so great. Many thanks for the amount of submissions. We have selected 17 questions and will answer them today. Today, Martin and Slimane will join us in the call and they will introduce themselves as soon as they get here. So grab another coffee and let's get started with 45 minutes of full governance power. And yeah, oh, I see they're already here. So I give them the mic.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Can you do a little introduction, Slimane?
Of course. While we're waiting. So I am lead smart contract developer at Q Development AG. And along with the team, we are trying to, because decentralized governance, we are going to explain in a second what it is. It's a great collective experiment. And we are trying to build and improve a new feature to the protocol, but as any other developers could also do in the future, and for the benefit of the community. So, but I'm mainly focused on, technically speaking, on the smart contract side. And for example, there are a number of smart contracts that allows the governance to operate.
Great. So I would say to Martin is here, we just go over to some questions I can ask directly to you. So Slimane, how does Q protocol incorporate decentralized governance?
Yes. So decentralized governance is...
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I had technical difficulties. Now I'm online. Apologies for that.
So maybe you can answer the first one, I believe, which is more generic and will help for the next question, which is, can you explain the concept of decentralized governance? And then we can follow the right order.
Do it like that.
Yeah,
sure. So sorry again for being late. I couldn't hear anything. Yeah, so third one. Decentralized governance is essentially the art and science of making decisions without having a central authority to refer to, which is, of course, what's happening today in the crypto space, in the decentralized protocol space, in the DAO space, and which I think is one of the topics that really will define how crypto and with Web3 is moving forward and developing in the next few years. So maybe I can take a step back and look a little bit at the history of what's been happening in crypto or what is now Web3. So basically you started out with Bitcoin, which was basically just digital money sending tokens from A to B. And all the decision rules, how that happens, are in the code. So most of you will be familiar with the term code is law. So also Bitcoin is, you could call it a decentralized governance framework or protocol, but the protocol's rules or the decision rules, the governance rules are all encoded, in the core client, in the Bitcoin code, which is doable essentially because what's needed is fairly straightforward. You just want to make sure that, if Alice sends a Bitcoin or a fraction thereof to Bob, that this is exactly what happens and there is nothing going on in between. And, no hidden rules, no callbacks, no chargebacks, whatever. So this works fine. Then you have the next stage of development, which is Ethereum, smart contract platforms. So you get the opportunity to, basically do free programming on the basis of a blockchain, which then allows you to do a lot more fancy stuff, like we've we've seen in Ethereum and in the ecosystem. You've got tons of developments in DeFi. For example, you have automated market makers, DEXs basically, which, you put in one coin into a pool, you take out another. And also there, what's happening is defined primarily by the code. But then very quickly you run into questions. Okay, what if we want to change the rules? What if we want to, add different features? What if something goes wrong and we want to revert transactions and so on and so forth? And this is where the question of governance really comes in, because you need decision rules on how that happens. And what we've seen is that those decision rules often really then revert back to the quote unquote old world. So basically either fully centralized decision making, someone with an admin key who calls the shots. Best case would be a multi-sig, so several people calling the shots, or you have sort of no rules, which means that if something goes wrong, and it always does, you kind of stuck with, okay, what do I do now? Do I have to go to a court? Do I have to, go to my local judge to get a ruling? How does that work? And typically that's a mess. And this is kind of where Q comes in, with providing a decentralized governance framework, which allows you to make those types of decisions, which allows you to resolve conflicts, but without having to revert back to old world centralized decision making, but with having processes, rules, and technical capabilities to make decisions, to govern projects, to govern protocols in a decentralized way.
Thank you, Martin. So you just explained the concept of decentralized governance, but how does Q protocol incorporate in decentralized governance? Can you both explain it a little bit more in detail?
Sure. Yeah, I will start. Slimane, jump in at any time. So essentially, the Q protocol starts from the Q constitution. So you have a rulebook, which is a contract, essentially, that defines how the protocol works and how conflicts are resolved. And then you have a system behind that, which is implemented in code to ensure that those rules could be followed. And just the main elements of the system are you have validator nodes, as in other POS networks that process transactions, but also you have what is called root nodes, which is a separate layer of nodes which can make or implement also judgment decisions. For example, when it comes to protocol changes and when it comes to conflicts. In addition to that, you have what is called expert panels. So for specific decisions, you might want experts, for example, in DeFi protocol. It can be very technical very quickly. So you don't necessarily want the community to make the decisions, but you want someone with expert knowledge to make those decisions. And those experts can be elected by the community. So you kind of outsource decision making to competent experts. And then as a last element, you have a system to resolve conflicts, so a dispute resolution mechanism, as it is called in the Q constitution, where the Q protocol today has integrated off-chain arbitration courts, namely the ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, which is the world's biggest, largest, most respected arbitration court, and they can rule on disputes. So we're currently working on integrating other dispute resolution or arbitration courts as well, but the ICC is the first one, and they can make decisions, and again, those can be implemented with the help of the process. For example, the root nodes, which then translate that, into a transaction on the blockchain, essentially. Slimane, do you have anything to add on that?
I think that's pretty relevant what you said, and to complete on that, just propose an analogy and to sum up everything, yeah, I think we have the constitution, and you have this balance of power. So I think that there's these two elements that distinguish Q from other forms of governance, because decentralized governance is not one thing, and it's not like a line, and you go in one way. You can see it more as a map, and there are many ways and many optimal solutions that you can find depending on which parameters you want to increase or decrease. And um, but for certain, the decentralized governance were pretty primitive, and they had a lot of use even for a very big protocol. Uh, I think first point with Q is the constitution. And so there's this thing that's not really code and that's above the code. And and I think one of the quotes of Q is beyond code, or it was one of the presentation you made. I remember, and beyond code, because we were naive at first, believing that the code will handle everything, and you have to account for something that is not in the code. And so it's like in the law, you have the law and the spirit of the law. So even if sometimes the law doesn't cover a very specific point, that doesn't mean a judge cannot um, cannot arbitrate. I mean, if you are prosecuted, because there are very generic things in the constitution that says, okay, this specific law doesn't cover that, but the spirit of the constitution say that it should be in line with that. And so you can take a decision anyway, and you can arbitrate and go to the ICC. So that's one thing, and I think it's brilliant. Another thing is balance of power. Balance of power is one of the optimal form of governance, and we can say that because this is what many countries in the world, after a long process of trial and error, have found. If you think about many forms of democracies and republic, you will have voters, but they don't directly vote for all the laws, which was the case in many primitive governance form of governance on chain. No, you don't have that. You vote for people that will then vote for those laws and pass those laws, and that makes more sense. But then you have a group of people that has a lot of power. So what do? You create a counter power, and so that's why usually in the republic you have a low and a high chamber. This is the case in France where I am. This is the case in many countries. I believe this is the case in Germany. In the US, you have the Congress and the Senate. And this dates back to a long time. So you can see that's my analogy. You have the parliament and you have the Senate, and you have the citizen. And in the end, the power is the citizen, but the parliament, the Senate are there to serve them. And the queue holder are the stakeholder here, but the validators and the root nodes are here to serve them, and the root nodes are here to check the power of the validators. And all of them, of course, the queue citizens and the holders, they can have some sort of influence on them. But we want to have some sort of celerity in the process. We don't want queue holders to vote for any vote that's going to happen all the time. It would create vote fatigue. So, yeah, that's my analogy for Q governance.
Thank you both. So, we just mentioned the Q constitution several times. Can you go a little bit more in detail also how it serves as a rule book for the protocol? So, because I think that's also an important topic.
Yeah, sure. I can take a shot at that. So essentially, as I said, the Q constitution is a private contract between everyone who's participating in Q. So it's actually binding for the people, which is great because it gives you certainty. So when you're interacting with a Q protocol, you can actually read upon the rules. You can find out what the rules are. and you're not subject to, arbitrary rulings, let's say, because you just don't know what it is. And then some court comes in and says, we interpret it this way or that way. So it gives a really solid framework for how the protocol functions. And I believe that this is something that is very different from most other protocol constitutions that you see, in the sense that in designing and developing the Q protocol, we and the people involved have spent a lot of time making sure that it is solid from a legal perspective, which most other protocols haven't really done. And secondly, that whatever is in the constitution can actually be enforced. So I mentioned, for example, that we have this arbitration clause. And if there is an arbitration ruling by the ICC, that actually gets implemented via the root nodes, and they are obligated to do so to implement whatever the ICC rules. So let's say if you didn't have that transmission mechanism, you could still have a constitution, and there are constitutions out there where it says, we want private arbitration to be, to come into play when there is a conflict. But then the question is, okay, if there is a ruling, how is it implemented? If that is not clear, and if there is no transmission mechanism how that happens, it's actually not worth much. So one key element, really, in my view, is of the Q constitution: A, that it's legally solid, and B, that there are those transmission mechanisms. How what is in the constitution, the rules that are in there, are actually enforced on chain.
You would like to add something, Slimane, or are you okay?
I'll pass. I think it's pretty good picture that Martin gave.
Great. So, as many people here in the audience know, there are two different nodes on Q. There is one, the validator node, and then there are the root nodes. And the root nodes act like they have the nickname the guardians of the constitution. Can you explain a little bit the difference between those types of nodes, Slimane?
I think we already a little bit explained in the previous answers, because those were global answers, but yet basically keep the analogy of the Republic. The root node, they have to keep in check what the validators are doing, and the validators are guaranteeing the state of what is happening on chain, and the nodes, the root nodes, they have this ability to slash malicious or malevolent or just unperforming validators. And both of them, of course, the Q holders, they have some sort of power on them. So there is this triangle of balance of power, and this is one of the concepts of Q.
Maybe I can just add to that also from a validator perspective. I see there are a bunch of people here in the call that I think are running validator nodes. So I think, especially from a validator perspective, it's actually a big plus, because the question is, okay, you have those root nodes and they can make decisions, and how is that good for me? How do I benefit from it? And one very clear benefit is, I think, that slashing decisions are really subject to a legal framework. They're subject to the constitution, so you can't have arbitrary slashing. In other ecosystems, we've witnessed discussions about slashing, and then if there are no clear rules, or if there are decisions that are made by quote unquote, social consensus, it's really hard to predict what will happen. And of course, that introduces uncertainty and also can result in unfair outcomes. So in Q, you don't have that. You have the certainty. You can look up exactly, okay, if I miss that many, epochs, what does it mean? What's the penalty? And it's very clear. And again, it's enforced. So, there is no such thing as unfair or unjustified slashing by quote unquote social consensus.
No, okay. So, and Slimane, you want to add something? Someone unmuted.
Oh, go on.
Okay. So, Q token holders are important, how can they actually participate in governance in future or now, or, can you explain it, Slimane?
There are several ways. One of them is, of course, by voting, which is the first way that come into mind. Is, for example, there are many proposals that are going to come, and some of them will require voting by the community. So they will come in the form of a QIP, a Q improvement proposal, similar to EIP. So this will be shared with the community, and it's, as I said, I am working on development, but it's really not like it will be in the traditional sense of development where we will impose, update, and so on. We will always make a proposal. We will be aware of that as the Q holders, and you will be able to critique, propose updates, and yourself, you can also make proposals too. If you have a rationale and you have an idea, it's one way also to participate in the governance. So by either voting, critiquing, or making proposal. So that's one way that you can do. Another way is also to control, to keep in check, for example, what is going on with the root node. If there are any misbehavior, also they can be a proposal not for improvement, but proposal to correct the situation. And as a Q holder, you have to know that you can have some sort of control in this triangle of power, and you can help to enforce the constitution if the constitution is not enforced by the root nodes and by the validators. So you're also guardian of the constitution in that sense, and not only the root nodes. So that's what comes to my mind now. Maybe Martin, you can complete on that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive. What is that, Slimane? So yeah, I mean, making proposals, voting, those are, I think, the main elements where every Q token holder can participate in governance.
That's great. So many of you, or some of you, may know the movie Back to the Future with the DeLorean. So let's look into Q's future. Someone from the community actually asked, what is the future of Q in 2 years? So Martin, can you get some infos out for us?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, there are some things which are on the way, which are already also within the constitution or in the white paper. So one big project, I think, for the Q protocol is QID. So for various reasons, I think it's pretty obvious that, within the governance of the Q protocol, but also for applications building on Q, having an ID system would be extremely valuable. And that is something that, currently people are already working on. And if you read the white paper, if you read the constitution, it's already envisaged that this will be built on Q. So that's I think one big project, big feature, which will be on Q, hopefully much earlier than in 2 years, but that is currently already being worked on. I mean, just taking the question maybe on a more personal level, where is Q in, I think, Yannick, you said in 2 years. Of course, to a large degree, that's not up to me, that's up to the community. But of course, we, as we are here in this call, all contribute. And what I really would like to see is, people, projects, protocols building on Q and really experimenting with the governance features that are provided on Q and really push the boundaries of what's possible in Web3. I have a background in the finance industry, and one thing that's always striking to me is that current DeFi protocols are really still quite limited. The progress that's been made is great. It's fantastic. There's so much happening. At the same time, if you look at the traditional financial industry, there is so much more that is really useful for people, like, insurance, pension plans, and so on. Lots of stuff that's not happening at all, or just in small experiments in the DeFi space. Same in the DAO space. I mean, you have a lot of DAOs that are experimenting with governance, but it's still really early stages in my view. And what Q offers is really, as Slimane said earlier, for people to go beyond code is law. And I think the design space that is being opened, by Q is huge. So I would love to see really a lot of experimentation in governance and just stuff being built that hasn't been built in the past, like bigger organizations that form with sub-DAOs and so on, and intricate decision making. But also in the DeFi space, I think that's really exciting. Just what you can do if you have proper decentralized governance, to me, I think is a huge, huge open space that I hope people will use and just come to Q and build on it.
Yeah, thank you. So let's take the DeLorean back to the actual time we have right now, and let's talk a little bit about tokenomics and funding rounds. What is happening there? Can you elaborate a little bit more about this topic?
Yeah, sure. I can take that also. So the very basic tokenomics are described both in the white paper and the constitution. So you have 1 billion Q tokens that were minted initially, and there is a fixed inflation of close to 1% per year. So it's a fixed amount of Q tokens that's generated, per block, which is leading to a small, but in percentage terms, declining inflation rate. Now, as you're probably aware, Q is not yet listed on any of the big exchanges. That's something that more likely than not will happen in the future, but is currently not the case. However, there has been a private funding round or private sale of Q, which also has been published. So you can read the blog posts. The main participants, which are not really investors, I would say, but really is strategic parties in that they operate nodes. They actively participate in governance. It's Deutsche Telekom and Greenfield One. Both of them have published a blog post describing details on that. So that's, I think, a good read to the topic. And I think also, that's likely to be more transparency and information on that from the Q Foundation, which is the initiator of the project. That will be most likely coming, sometime soon. So they're with us maybe for a bit longer on much more details than on sort of tokenomics on a slightly deeper level.
Thanks. So there was a question from the community that goes like, what is the reward distribution date and how much will be distributed, Martin?
Yeah, I assume that this refers to the incentivized testnet program. I think so. There, I think there is a blog post actually out there which describes the process, There will be a reward that's in Q. So mainnet tokens. So it's not, an NFT or something like that. That you sometimes get in other programs, but it will be mainnet tokens. So the validators that participate successfully in the incentivized assessment program will be able to spin up validators with those mainnet tokens on mainnet as well, which of course we hope many of the ones who participate will do. I don't know if there is a fixed date that I would need to check. And also the exact amount, I think, hasn't been determined yet, but it's basically going to be compensation for the cost and a little bit extra on top.
Okay, thank you. So you just mentioned that you NFT or Q tokens. So I would say let's move over to Slimane. Are there any D apps that build on Q currently?
So yes, about D apps, we can group them in maybe two categories. So you will have DeFi apps, so everything that will allow a movement of capital and tokens, and that includes, for example, bridges, and also apps that allow to transfer or swap assets or to make use of those assets. It could be also introducing more stable coins. So that's one thing. And another type of D apps or dApps will be, for example, everything that allow DAO or other project to onboard on Q. For example, we are working on a governance development kit, which will basically allow any DAO to onboard on Q without having to write one single line of code, and which would be great. So there will be more and more user and stuff being built. So that's the thing that we are working on. But then again, we are not the sole developer. And for example, following the previous hackathon, we had, for example, a project called envelope.finance, and it allows you to use email to send assets. And they made the first proposal, and we hope that we will have more and more projects like that. And so having a rich community and vibrant community of developers on Q, and that would be great. I hope that, I'm pretty sure that this will happen, and there are already a lot of exciting stuff being built. And for example, for the case of the governance development toolkit, there will be, of course, an app, but we will also release open source a set of smart contracts that will allow also other developers to fork this repo and make their own modification and deploy their own DAO if, for example, they want to use specific assets for membership, or if they want to have their own form of governance. Yes, that's an example of how we can bring along other builders.
That's great. So some people don't know it, but we actually launched a mainnet last year, March. And the question would be, how many validators will there be on mainnet? Can you start, Martin or Slimane, one of you?
Yeah, sure. I can take that. I mean, Slimane can take it as well, obviously. But so currently, the number of validators that can be active on mainnet is limited to 22. That's a value that's in the Constitution. As we explained earlier, the basic rules are all defined in the Constitution. But 22 is definitely not the final number. So, as other DPoS protocols Q has started with a fairly small set of validators, but very clearly the idea is to increase the set of validators, to further decentralize, to make it robust, but also, of course, to scale it in a way that's reasonable and that doesn't lead to in the worst case, I guess, network failures. So in Q, you have again the constitution, which defines the maximum number of validators. So a change in the number of validators will require constitution update. So basically a parameter update of the relevant constitution parameter. So if you go to hq.q.org, you can actually see all the parameters that are relevant, that are in the system, and you can basically everyone, Q token holder, make proposals, argue for the case to increase the validator set, or decrease it. That's also possible, but probably increase is what makes much more sense in the short to medium term. Submit a proposal, and the Q token holders would on it. So where exactly the optimal number is, I can't tell. That's one thing to find out also over the coming months and years. As you've seen in other TPS protocols, it takes a bit of experience how the network behaves, in actual fact, to figure out what the optimal number is. Great thing about Q is that I believe we can reach a similarly or even higher level of security compared to other networks with a much lower validator count, because we do have that second tier of nodes, root nodes, which provide checks and balances that also positively affect the security of the network. So compared to other networks that maybe have 101 validators, 250, whatever the number is, with asynchronous validation, Q actually has a performance advantage, I believe, through that dual node structure.
Thanks, Martin. So there is another question regarding the validators, and it's how many Q coins will it take to be a validator or node? Since you just mentioned there are 22. Slimane, can you explain a little bit more about it?
So what will happen in the future is that there will be the highest staker that will be able to enter in the ranking. And in the case of root nodes, what will likely come in the future, and of course this is all with the community, of course, this will be that apart from just the amount of tokens, coins staked, will be taken into account the diversity, geography, the industry, if from which they are coming from, and to have a ranking that is dynamic and relying on those parameters. So we maybe don't want to just rely on the amount staked. There are other criteria that we can take into account. But this is for the root nodes. So,
All right. So we got a question from the community. Web Viking, thank you for that. That's a great name, by the way. So we will answer your question at the end of the call. So bear with us a little bit and stay in the call. Martin, do nodes earn rewards like validators?
So I assume this refers to root nodes. The question, it just says nodes, I think. So the answer is yes, they do earn rewards, but different to validators. So essentially there are three types of nodes in the Q system. There are just regular network nodes, which everyone can spin up, which don't participate in governance or in consensus specifically, and those don't earn any rewards. Then there are validators. For the validators, the rewards are stake weighted. So basically, you put up self-stake. You can have stake delegated to your validator node, and then the distribution of rewards between both the active validator set and the standby validators is proportional to the total accountable stake. And the third type of nodes is root nodes, which we've referred to several times already, which have a specific function within the Q governance. And for the root nodes, basically every root node gets the same reward. So it's not stake weighted, but it's just the same reward for each root node in the active set.
Yeah, thank you. So in our call, you mentioned experts. Is there actually an application form to become an expert, and do experts receive rewards?
Yeah, so two questions. So first of all, any Q token holder can apply to be an expert. There is no specific form, but you have to apply online. You have to submit an application to become an expert online. So if you go to hq.q.org, that is where you can easily apply to become an expert. In one of the expert panels, there is one which is concerned with DeFi, decentralized finance, setting parameters. There is one which is concerned with root node selection. There is one which is concerned with fees and incentives. And of course, in the future, there could be many more, depending on what people come up with and build on Q and need on Q. So anyone who feels they are competent can apply, and it's all the application is on chain. You can of course provide background. You can link to or refer to web pages that you design to advertise yourself, so to speak. But basically, the application is online. And if you're looking for details on how to do that, the documentation is a good place to look at. So at docs.q.org, you can find the details on how this on-chain application works. Second question that you asked, Yannick, or that came from someone in the community, is about receiving rewards as experts. That's a very good question, because actually today that is not the case. But I personally think that at some point it will make absolute sense for experts also to be rewarded. This is still early days of the protocol, and most of the experts in the expert panels are people that are very active in the community anyways, including myself, for example, but there are others. Most of them have some other role and don't necessarily do this, for rewards. But in the future, it make absolute sense to also have a reward for experts who contribute competence, knowledge, and also time, and provide a service to the community and to protocols building on Q.
Since we are talking about rewards right now, will there actually be a reward for completing KYC and getting a digital ID, Martin?
Yes. So first, maybe let me clarify those two terms. So there is QID, which, as I mentioned, is not active yet, but is currently developed in the Q community, and this will be an on-chain ID that will allow you, for example, to participate in certain governance decisions. If you look through the white paper, look through the Constitution, you will find certain instances where there is a veto right of QID holders once they're active. So the idea here is to have a counterbalance to sort of one token, one vote type of governance decisions, which, as we all know, tend towards oligarchy. So it's kind of checks and balances, as Slimane has mentioned earlier. But that is not, and let me be clear about that, that is not a KYC process in the sense that your real life identity is not on chain or is not known by anyone from the core team or so on. So that there might be a process of getting that ID that could involve some KYC with a KYC provider, but that personal information will not go on chain. So I think this is a very important issue. I mean, there could be all kinds of applications where that KYC information then is used and could be very helpful for people interacting with Q or building stuff on Q. But the purpose is not to have sort of a KYC chain as some private blockchains may be doing. So it's just very important to keep those two apart.
Okay, so a community member asked 3 questions regarding the HQ, and I will just run them down. So the first question would be, when would what be added to the HQ? And the other would be when an NFT marketplace would be added, and also farming. Can you go a little bit more in detail? Maybe you have some infos regarding this.
Yes. So first of all, here I want to make the point that everyone can build things on Q. So all of those things that I mentioned, swapping facility, NFT marketplace, farming products, all of that, everyone can build and deploy on Q. What is currently shown in HQ, that are things that are defined by the Q constitution. So, again, you can just deploy protocols on Q completely permissionlessly, as you can on Ethereum, as you can do on other chains. If you want to deploy protocols on Q that use the Q governance, that means that there is an application or a constitution change that incorporates those protocols. And currently what's shown in HQ, that is only functionalities that are defined in the Q constitution. But in terms of those products, I can say that I think, yes, I think there are people working on all of those. I can't say because, again, this is in part due to, whenever the people building this will be deploying things, I can't say exactly when those things will be deployed or when those functions will be deployed. But, I know there are people working on a variety of products on Q. But as I said, it's completely open. Anyone is invited to do so.
Great. So we will see some stuff in the future. That's great. So with the recent SEC action against Paxos and Paxos BUSD and Circle USDC, are you concerned about Q synthetic currencies?
Okay, I'll also take this question if you don't mind, Slimane. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, no problem.
Okay, sorry, I just was cut off for a second. So Slimane, if you don't mind, I can take the question, but feel free to add. So I should probably preface the answer to this question as all sort of legal questions by saying that I'm not a lawyer, and none of this obviously is legal advice. But from what I understood from the cases here, Paxos, specifically BUSD, those are centralized stablecoins. So you have fiat currency backing those stablecoins, which is different from QUSD or Q synthetic assets that could be created. And B, from what I understood, there were specific concerns, and I haven't read the whatever it is, SEC documentation on that. But from what I understood, there were specific concerns, for example, about KYC and anti-money laundering. Now, those things don't apply to the Q protocol or to the QDeFi system, because that is fully decentralized. There is no central entity issuing QUSD or any other Q synthetic assets, and there is no entity that could be responsible for doing so, or that could be also in the line, so to speak, for regulatory action. So the question, are we concerned? I would say, in a general sense, everyone, I think, should follow what's going on, both in the US and in Europe. Having said that, the Q system is completely decentralized, and also if you look at at least the European regulatory efforts, MiCA specifically, it's very much focused on centralized assets, centralized companies, what's called crypto asset service providers, I believe. And so that doesn't apply to decentralized protocols such as Q.
All right, thanks, Martin. So let's get over to 2 questions out of the community. They're coming from Web Viking. The first question would be, how do you imagine people coming to Q? Does anyone want to step in?
Can you, I'm not sure to understand, how do you imagine people, like what kind of people? Or
I think he's talking about people who are interested in Q and want to participate in Q and so on. So yeah.
Okay. So from my perspective, Martin can complete on that again. And as we said earlier, I think first thing is participating in the governance and making proposals. It's really a collective experiment, and more than experiment, because it's going to a mainnet. It's collective development. It's first thing, and also anyone that wants to build is welcome, but you don't need to be a super expert developer to make a proposal. It could be to make a proposal where you suggest to change a parameter, or you want to change a process. The more you use the governance, the more you will have feedback. So those two come together. You don't need to be developer. Another thing is, of course, if you want to launch your DAO, or you might know somebody that runs an organization and that might be interested, or in those two cases, you can head towards community, head of community, or head of partnerships, and we would gladly help them on board on Q.
Great.
Yeah, maybe I can just add, because probably I guess also the question is referring to how do I get tokens? Probably. As I said earlier, there isn't a major exchange listing yet for Q, but in all likelihood that is going to happen at some point. But until then, there are a couple of opportunities. So first of all, of course, there is testnet, and there is testnet faucet. So anyone wanting to try out stuff to build can just jump on the testnet, deploy stuff there, check it out. For Mainnet, we have a validator onboarding program, which is specifically aimed at validators. So Florian, who I think is on the call, I think he just dropped off because earlier from the team, is a good person to talk to there. There are a couple of blog posts also related to that. And there are opportunities to acquire tokens specifically for validators. But lastly, also, I mean, if you have already done stuff on testnet and want to deploy something on mainnet, just jump on the Discord, get in touch with the team. We'll find a way to get some tokens to you.
Yeah, you just started almost the second question. The second question would be when the launch would happen. So the token listing event. Can you give a little bit more inputs about that? Because you just started it, and maybe Web Viking would like to hear a little bit more about it.
I can't give a date because that's to a large degree dependent on exchanges or on people maybe launching or setting up a pool on DEX. So I can't give a date, but I'm sure it will happen in the not too distant future.
That's great. That's nice. So there is an event happening called ETH Denver. And is anyone of the Q community going to this event?
Yes, I am. So, if anyone's there,
what a wonder!
if anyone's there, do hit me up. Would be great to meet people there. I know also some other people are going. Nicholas from the team is going. Nicholas isn't on the call today. I think Diana will also be going. So there will be a bunch of people from the Q community at ETH Denver. If you can't find us, just hit us up on Discord, on Twitter, or whatever the preferred medium is, Telegram. That would be great to meet.
Yeah, I think we are done with the questions. We took 1 hour. That's a solid time, I would say. So I would say many thanks to the community as well as to Martin and Slimane for coming to this call. Yeah, like I said, it was a pleasant hour with lots of interesting inputs regarding Q as well as governance. I look forward to the next call and see you all in the Q community.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you and have a nice day.
Bye-bye.